Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. So we will shortly kick off, but as you are joining in the lovely audience, maybe you can just drop us a little comment. Let us know where in the world you are joining from today, and we will talk you through who our lovely guests are and what we'll be chatting through today. So for everyone who is new, my name is Kelly McGrath-Smith, so I'm the Community Director here at Hire. We're really delighted to have you here today. For those of you who might be new to Hire, we are a free-to-join global community of internal talent and HR folk. So we've got over 10,000 members at the moment, which is amazing. And our community lives over on Slack. So we like to kind of think of ourselves as the hive mind of global TA. So really united on a mission to really help level up the industry. And as part of that mission, we love to bring you these weekly webinars that we host on LinkedIn Live. And today's webinar, we're going to be looking at how to create the ultimate candidate experience, and also talking quite a lot around how you can reinvigorate your entire process using design thinking. So really, really exciting topic, which we'll kick off soon. Oh, we've got some of our audience saying where they're joining some. So we've got Bulgaria, sunny Edinburgh. That sounds great. I'm in rainy London, no sun here. We've got Austin, Texas. We've got London. Quite a few locations today, which is great to see. So I will hand over to our lovely panel to introduce themselves, just so you can get to know some of our speakers a little bit more. So I will start with Ali. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. But for those that don't know me, I'm Ali. I'm a senior recruiter, and I've been in this space now for about 10 years or so. I've worked in various startups and scale-ups and enterprise environments, so I've seen customer experience in various guises throughout. But the reason why I'm really here today is because I want to share a couple of stories around how I got involved in loving candidate experience so much. And it started really in the tech space, recruiting for them, and coming across the agile and design thinking principles that these guys were applying in their world for their customers and products. And part of me was influenced with thinking, how can we bring an element of that into our HR world moving forward to modernize it and get us closer to our own customers? So that was kind of part one of the love. But the second, more from a personal point of view, is I was a candidate in the market probably about 3 years ago during COVID, and I had gone through some pretty painful and some memorable candidate experiences myself. So that kind of informs my thinking and influence with candidate experience moving forward. So that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Thanks, Ali. And Josh, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me as well. For those who don't know me, I'm Josh. I'm a talent acquisition partner at X Design, a digital transformation consultancy based in the UK. So I fell into recruitment, as I'm sure all of us did, about 4 years ago. So I've been doing tech recruitment primarily for a number of different businesses, from e-commerce to video games to now back to that tech space. And similar sort to Ali, I was really interested in design and UX and learning all about that area as I recruited into those departments quite heavily. And some of those practices, it was really interesting, and how we could apply those to the recruitment world and stay agile, but also keeping candidate experience at the heart of it. So very excited to share some of my experience and learning with you all today.
Amazing. And Magda?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Magda, and I'm senior tech recruiter at Yelp and also based in the UK. I've been in recruiting world since 8 years, around that. And since 5 years, I've been living in London, and I've been working in different spaces, starting in consultancy, technology, also been in retail for a while, hiring for retail. And since few years, I've been in tech, currently at Yelp, senior tech recruiter working on engineering and product. Basically, Yelp is an American company from Bay Area. So I'm always saying to people in Europe that it's kind of TripAdvisor, but for United States and for local services. So basically, first time in my life, since 3.5 years, I've been on the product side. And candidate experience for me is just like simple, treat people like you would like to be treated, with empathy. And I believe what we hear and what we see in the service from candidates, that we do it well, very well at Yelp, and I'm happy to share some of the best practices today.
Amazing. Oh, we're delighted to have you all here. And I think actually, Magda, you raised like a good point at the end there. It's probably worth if we start off by each maybe just talking around like what is candidate experience to you in terms of your experience, your background, just to kind of set the scene before we dive into some of our juicier topics. So Magda, you gave an overview there. Ali, how about you? Would you like to maybe just explain what candidate experience is to you?
Yes, so I did a quick definition search on Google for this, and my understanding it's how people feel about your organization once they've gone through a hiring process. So essentially it's the perceptions that you're creating through these interactions. And for me, really, the personal approach is leading with empathy, first and foremost, and personally always trying to leave people or the processes in a better state than I found them. And the place that I want to get to with that really is trying to create them from their point of view of what they want and need in that moment. Otherwise, I think it's very easy to get lost in the creating solutions that don't address their needs for them. So that's my personal take on candidate experience.
Yeah, love that bit around empathy as well. Josh, how about you?
So I'm going to be super cheesy and talk about how, to me, candidate experience it's the heart of everything we do, right? I think there's a perception in the recruitment industry that we're there to find talent and we've got to find the right candidates for us, but it's a two-way street, and candidates have to choose the right opportunity for them, more so than anything else. And so candidate experience really is that starting point where as long they need, no matter if a candidate is successful or unsuccessful, what role they're going for, they should all have an absolutely amazing experience, so that even if they don't work for you now, they still can come away and say, I really had a good experience, and they might turn into future candidates for you. So
yeah, absolutely. It's almost that like talent nurturing piece as well. Someone might not be right now, but actually they could be the perfect candidate, in a year's time. Great examples there. I think we'll kind of dive in now to kind of a bit more detail, but for anyone who's tuned in, please, feel free to drop any thoughts, comments, questions as we go through. We will leave time at the end for a Q&A as well, but you can absolutely ask questions or share any thoughts as we go through as well. So I guess, one of the things that we were kind of speaking about as a group when we got together to discuss this webinar is, what are the points in terms of when does candidate experience start? And one of the topics we were kind of looking at was, that initial point of a candidate seeing a job spec. So maybe we can chat through in a bit more detail, anything that you've done in your time to maybe make job specs stand out, anything that you've learned along the way. So Magda, maybe we'll start with you in terms of the job spec side of things. Maybe you can talk us through maybe what you do at Yelp or anything that you have found helpful over your career.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I will start with the Yelp culture because it's technically related a lot with job specs that we do. So Yelp is a very diverse environment. We have the privilege to have people from around the world that we could help relocate to start working with us here in the UK. And the base rule for us for job description is to use simple language, simple English language, so that everyone can understand us, what we ask for. And our job descriptions are very short as well, because we tend to analyze different sources, also external sources. And we found out that especially people from minority groups, when they see a lot of boxes to tick in terms of responsibilities and requirements from them, they tend not to finish the application. So we reinvented the process a few years back, and we keep it simple, and we have disclaimers that if you don't tick all the boxes, still apply. It's very important for minority groups. It's also very important to keep it short, simple, and have inclusive language. What we do in our company as well, the talent acquisition team, it's a few people, but we are divided into sub-teams. And one of the sub-team in talent acquisition organization is responsible also for checking job description language, before we post it online. So we are a very well documented company. We have documented for everything, but when we start posting the job, we already have a template with benefits, with inclusion language, and we just put the things from hiring managers to there, and then the team is analyzing if it's good language enough to post, if it's coherent with our standards and with other job posts. So that's how we start. And when we ask hiring manager to give us the data about what we should post there, they are also trained, and they are actually also, they know that those principles about keeping it short, keeping it like English simple for everyone, and keeping the inclusive language.
Yeah, a really good point there around inclusive language. I think we kind of spoke about this as well in terms of, various gender decoders, but maybe Josh or Ali, if you have any thoughts or experience in terms of, how can you make job specs inclusive, and are there any kind of tools or processes that you've used before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from our perspective, yes, we use things like gender decoders as well. It's something that takes 2 seconds, but can really highlight something you might have missed as a word that might lean more towards one identifying group rather than the other. I think another thing as well from an accessibility point of view, and then again, this is probably the person who studied design in me speaking, but some of the thoughts we've had recently is around little things you might not have thought of around font and the color schemes of your websites and all that kind of stuff, that kind of UX style of thinking. Is that potentially putting off potential talent? Because if your job advert, which again, very different from a job description, but if your job advert on your careers site isn't accessible, you still might not be attracting as wide a talent pool as you might think. But yeah, you're right. That inclusive language piece, I think, is really important. And for us as well, we have that clear difference between a job advert versus a job description, where a job description is very detailed, a lot of bullet points, but using our kind of internal frameworks around defining what exactly a job is, versus the job adverts where it's why is it a good opportunity for the candidate. So it talks more about what the potential is there for, rather than listing a list of bullet points as long as your arm around we require this, we require that for you to do this job. It's not about that for us, and for me personally, it's more around why would a candidate want to do that job in the first place. So we've found that method works really well for us in my current role and past roles as well.
Yeah, and I pretty much mirror both what Magda and Josh have said so far. So I've got nothing additional to add to that, but I've got an example to use later on in our design thinking about when we've reinvigorated some of the job adverts. So I can bring that to life for you later.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I think all of these are like super important topics to cover early on. And I think also, Josh, your point around job adverts versus job specs, it feels like in recent years, it's just a job spec that is repopulated as a job advert. And I think there's that kind of education piece around actually, like, this is the first point of contact. A candidate will see your business, see the language that you're using, try and get like a sense of your culture, your values from the language that you're using in the job spec. And to your point, Magda, that kind of piece on the job advert to say, look, if you don't tick all the boxes, still apply, because often a job advert is a bit of a wish list. And I think it's really important to really pull out the key points in terms of like what's essential for this job, versus it just being this really long list that might put candidates off. And I guess when we kind of move on from the job spec, then we kind of move into, that kind of interaction that a candidate will have in the process, and that's either with a recruiter, straight to interview, depending on, how your business works. So maybe we can chat a little bit more specifically around that kind of interaction piece that candidates have when they come into the process. Josh, would you like to kind of kick us off on this one?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that interaction piece is really, really important, because I think that helps differentiate you versus, other people that the candidate might be looking at in terms of a potential place they want to work. What I found works really well for me in the past is a lot of work and collaborating really closely with marketing on employer branding content. So my experience will be leaning towards the tech sector, because that's what I've worked in primarily. But I think it's it can be applied to any kind of industry or sector really. But we found what worked really well for us is being able to generate engagement from a candidate by having some content that they can engage with. So as an example, when I've worked in recruited for software engineering teams, I've worked with the team and said, right, okay, what obviously might be a bit different for some businesses that can't really talk about too specifically about the work they do. But, you know, I found a lot of success by working with the team and creating like blogs about what the day in the life of a software engineer at X business looks like. And we've done some videos with some senior leadership within the team around, you know, what kind of technology do we use? Like what's new, what's interesting. And even though when I've watched that candidate back, when I've watched that content back or read it back, I'll only understood about half of it. I'm not a super technical person, but when I send that to a candidate and who does understand that world and does understand the language, it's so much more powerful because it gives them a real peek behind the curtain of exactly what the day-to-day life of the role will be. That's something that I don't think we as recruiters can do as much, unless, like, don't get me wrong, we understand our worlds well and we can sell that. But I think it means more coming from the people and the teams that they might potentially be working in. So that has really generated some engagement where candidates have come back to me and said, you know, they've taken that extra time to read that blog or watch that video and they've found it really interesting. And then they're really bought in, they're really excited. And then when they go into that interview, that then creates talking points for them talking to the team around, oh yeah, I watched this video around this technology, found it really interesting. So by the time they get through that process, because they've been informed so much and been interacted so much, they feel kind of they've had a real special experience and they're excited about the opportunity. So when it comes to making that offer, hopefully you've got a really good hook that they know exactly what they're getting in for.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well. That kind of whole piece around those touch points that mean a lot at the start and actually can pay off when it comes to that offer stage as well. Ali or Magda, is there anything that you've kind of done in this area from that kind of touch point perspective?
Most definitely. So kind of build on the employer brand, but I've used candidate packs, I suppose, kind of like exec recruitment packs in the past. And I find that the industry relies a lot on candidates having to go out and do their own research. So the candidate pack goal really is to pull all that together for them and relay that in a real simple format to go, look, these are the important things you need to know about us. So you don't have to spend time going out and researching. So when you do have the interaction with us, at least you are on the same foot of terminology and language and the context of our business for us to have a really engaging conversation with, because I'm not a fan of trying to calibrate their understanding of the business in the first call. It's really about them mutually assessing us and being peers and like-minded in our knowledge of each other. So that's the place I try and get candidates to in that first interaction, that we've got a non-biased kind of balanced view of each other.
Yeah, amazing. And with the candidate packs as well, I think that brings up like a good point around, you know, you can set the scene with candidates. You can let them know what to expect in terms of the number of interviews. So you're taking some of that like fear out of the process. And yeah, I think it's a really good way to really set the scene as well.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, if you take your neurodivergent individuals who prefer to have information up front, to know what to expect, it takes the pressure off them a little bit. So you end up having hopefully a more relaxed individual going through the process.
And how about you, Magda?
Similar to Ali, we also have materials for our candidates, provided that they are successful. I mean, like if somebody is accepted to go to the first stage based on CV, they get the materials with like PDF, with timeline and also number of stages. Its process itself is quite simple because we have only 3 stages and including call from the recruiter. And we also keep the timeline, how we do it, because I think it's worth mentioning that talent acquisition in my company is actually part of engineering organization and not HR organization. So because we are part of engineering organization, we collaborate with engineers very like on a daily basis. So the feedback we get from them is within like 48 hours maximum. So we can use actually this information on the material to candidates that this is like expected feedback to you. The people who are unfortunately not accepted based on the CV to move forward, they also get, all of them get the information from us, from European team, We don't send like an automatic response from, I don't know, no reply. We send it from personal recruiters' emails. So if they have some questions around that, they can also actually ask us personally, because they can reply to those messages. So that's how the process looks like.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's great to hear like the different ways from different companies, because I think that's where like a lot of learnings can come to kind of cherry pick actually, oh, I might take that bit for my next process. And I guess, you know, we can't talk about candidate experience without talking about the interview process. So maybe let's chat around, you know, a time that maybe you've revamped an interview process or you've got to improve an interview process from the perspective of candidate experience. Josh, I'll start with you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of, we've done a lot of work recently within X Design around looking at our processes and kind of mapping out what's going to move forward, because we've incorporated, we're a very values focused business and a people focused business. So, and values is slightly different to culture, but that's probably a topic for another webinar. But we really wanted values to be at the forefront of our interview process to ensure that those coming into the business are kind of align with the values that we hold so dear across everything we do. So we knew what the stage was. We identified the values interview stage and what that looked like. And it was a great way to reduce bias in the process, because we've got quite a wide talent pool, interview pool there, which is really interesting. But it took a lot of work around identifying, right, okay, where does that sit in with different processes for different departments? Because every department has their own process, and you don't want to elongate it to a 5-stage interview process, because no candidate wants that. So it was a lot of work, but I think that was very much done with the candidate in mind as well, because I think, again, from a candidate perspective and that whole two-way street process, that a candidate when they're looking at different opportunities, they want to join a company where they align with the values, that they know they're going to fit in with the culture. And I think I've seen it when I've been speaking to people who recently joined the business, like, how are you finding things? And the thing that keeps coming up is just, everyone I speak to is like, get on really well with them, and they really align with the values, and we collaborate really well, and we care really much. And it's little things like that. So I think that's done really well for us so far, and we're seeing that the feedback's starting to drip through now, where more candidates are going through that process, that it's working really well. So it's about having that consistency as well across the different interview processes as well.
Yeah, amazing. And Magda, I know when we had kind of first chat as a group, you were kind of talking around the values piece as well, particularly with minority groups in terms of your hiring at Yelp. Maybe you can chat us through kind of what you do here and what your process looks like.
Yes, sure. So the process itself, it's application, intro from recruiter, first stage and final stage, and then offer stage if candidate is successful. That's like a pattern. However, we also introduced culture chats a few years ago. It was like first we got the phase on only on the minority candidates, and we were trying the culture chats for a few weeks, and then we understood it's successful because we gathered the feedback from those candidates, even if they were not successful in the end, if they didn't get hired. I mean, culture chats, it's something which is not obligatory for a candidate, but it's something added from us to them. So it's kind of 30 minutes conversation on Google Meet with before the final stage and after the first stage. So before the final stage, candidate is invited to have this kind of chat. We mentioned that it's not obligatory. If they don't want to, it's fine. It doesn't have any implications on the result. And the culture chat, it's with if it's a minority candidate, it will be equivalent like of the minority group person from the company, not necessarily from the team, but from the whole company. So we have a number of volunteers from different minority groups in the company who participate in those chats. And we got the feedback that it was very successful for them. And currently we can offer it for every candidate. So basically, in my case, I have currently the rec for director, which is a very senior role in the organization. And we are very careful to give candidates this kind of experience, to get culture chat before they go to the panel, because it's not only about asking questions, but also to get to know better the values in the company. And it's very informal atmosphere and on this kind of chat, because it's always like with somebody who is, if it's director level, it will be somebody senior in the organization who will be talking to them. So it's very nice to them to have more information and more culture insight.
Yeah.
And one thing I have to mention is sometimes I ask also, when we have a candidate accepting the offer, they said, like, actually this culture chat helped me to get this information that I wanted and helped me out to actually accept your offer comparing to other companies. So definitely that was a successful program.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we've just got a question from Kate in the chat, just a little bit around the structure of those. So I know you said they're quite informal, but maybe you can chat through what they look like.
Yeah, so the person, for example, if we have a candidate for a director, it's speaking, let's say, with engineering manager of the director from company. First of all, our employee starts with explaining what they are doing, who they are, and also if they are involved in any of the groups, like resource groups at Yelp, because we have many of them, they talk about it. So I'm involved in these projects here. I'm not only involved in engineering part, but I'm also like involved in culture part. They talk about it, and they talk about what's the culture here. I mean, like, what are the values? And they say, okay, this is our value, playing well with others. It's one of 5, and we for example, we have how we have it in the organization inside, how we implement it. It's because we are open-minded, we give and receive feedback, we are very respectful for different cultures, and they start to talk about it. And then it doesn't have to be 30 minutes, sometimes it's less, but candidates tend to have questions about what are the advice for the panel interviews, for example, and because they talk with a senior member if it's a senior role again, they will be senior member on culture chat. Those people are also trained interviewers, and they can give some advice from them, how it was for them going through the process to get to Yelp. So it's advice, it's answering questions. Yeah, that's pretty much. And of course, like going through the bits and pieces of the values and culture.
Amazing, thank you. And then Ali, how about you on the interview side of things?
So similar to what both Josh and Magda have said, but in terms of, we had a particular candidate, an underrepresented candidate, going for a leadership role in a business, and she was going to be one of the females in the leadership team. So we got through the interview stage, made an offer, but she still wanted some time to do more of the cultural checks herself. And rather kind of backdoor reference check, she engaged us in that conversation, and she actually selected the individuals she wanted to talk to and that she was interested in. We obviously gave some guidance to these individuals how to conduct the conversation and what to get out of it. But essentially, she told us what she wanted and needed at the moment. And we thought, well, let's try it. Let's see what happens, because we were going through quite some lengthy negotiations with her. And thankfully, those conversations worked in our favor and her favor, and ended up joining the business because of that.
Amazing. It's great when you have like a success story that you can tangibly kind of talk about, even with future hiring managers as well. And I think, one of the things that we really wanted to cover in detail is all around design thinking and how you can actually use this to reinvigorate your process. And we thought it would be really useful to kind of start off with just kind of a basic explanation of what design thinking is, because I think especially if you haven't recruited necessarily in the design space, this might seem like a different subject. So maybe Ali, you can kind of maybe give us a little bit of an overview in terms of your version of what kind of design thinking, agile working means.
So for those that haven't come across it, it's typically in the tech and product and UX space, but it is not exclusive to that environment. It really is a tool to help you do creative problem solving. And it works on the basis of applying empathy and walking in the shoes of your user or your customer, and then deriving relevant insights from that to help you create suitable solutions based on their wants and needs. in its most simplest fashion. What's great about it is it encourages you to step away from thinking assumptive. So you might think that you've highlighted a problem and you assume what the problem is, and you go and create a solution that actually doesn't address that. Design thinking allows you to take a step back in the shoes of the candidate and go, actually, from my point of view, this is what I'm finding challenging, and this is the insight I can give you to then create a solution on the back of that. So that's my high level view for those who aren't in that world.
Yeah, really helpful. And I think we can kind of deep dive a little bit in terms of, how we've used it ourselves and some examples. And I know, Josh, you've got an example from your time at Cinch. Maybe you can kind of talk us through how you've used design thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Great definition, by the way, Ali. I love that a whole applying empathy piece. And so my history with kind of design thinking, when I was on furlough before I went internal, I was doing a UX course because recruiting UX designers, found it really interesting. It was quite creative, different than recruitment. So I was learning a lot about user-centered design. And, the first thing I thought about was candidate experience and how the candidates are users almost, but a lot of the same principles can apply. And when I joined Cinch, eventually it got to the point where I was only like whole of tech recruitment for a while, and then eventually transitioned as the team grew to look after design and product because I was really passionate about that space. I wanted to stay close to it. And the design team, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, it was a bit of a wild west initially. There was very little kind of structured process in place. Mixed bag in terms of feedback, both from the hiring managers that were recruiting for the roles and also from candidates. Most of the time they had a great experience, but there was just some stuff we could iron out. So what I think my first port of call was, right, okay, let's work collaboratively and build this process out together using this feedback that we've received, both from yourselves as hiring managers and also candidates. So I ran what's called a retrospective session. So if you are in the tech world or you have business analysts or any product people within your business, collaborate with them if you're new to this world, because they'll help you steer that conversation. But basically, we looked at the whole process as it was now, and it wasn't like it was very much an open forum. There was no right or wrong thing to say. Let's give really honest feedback. How are things right now, and how do things look in an ideal world? And it was a long session. Don't get wrong. It's like, it's a couple of hours, and there's still tweaks you have to do here and there. But from that session, we identified, we worked out and penciled out a process that we felt worked for everybody, keeping candidate experience at the heart of it, but also working for the teams that we were recruiting into as well. And then from there, when recruitment picked up again and we were filling, batches of roles and things, we got some great feedback from candidates, and we kind of took that and reassessed it versus what was previously. And candidates were talking about how, it was a much more streamlined process. They felt like they got a lot more holistic view of the entire team working on. But from hiring managers' perspectives, they were talking about the kind of caliber of candidates that they were interviewing and how they were talking about how they got a lot more out of the interviews that they did. So in the end, it worked out very well for anybody. But it's design thinking is also about that constant iteration piece. Like, nothing is ever perfect and nothing is ever finished. And I think the same could be said for talent acquisition. Like, we're all do this for a while, and we feel like, just when we've got it right, this new idea and way of thinking comes out, and it's like, oh, we've got to change things again. But constant iteration and constant improvement is at the heart of design thinking, and I think the same could be used for recruitment, definitely. A retro is something that you can do literally monthly, quarterly, yearly. You can constantly kind of have that dedicated time to work with the teams you're recruiting into. That's the important part, is the collaborative piece. But have that really open discussion and talk about what's working, what isn't working, and then be able to improve it from there.
And so when it comes to, like, for that example, in terms of like that iterative piece, were you looking at it from your retro perspective internally and then getting that feedback from candidates as well, and kind of marrying the two feedbacks together?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a case of starting off the retrospective session by saying, right, what's the state of play now? So basically on a interactive whiteboard tool called Miro, I outlined the process as it was now and highlighted, some feedback that we'd had from candidates, from hiring managers, whether that's conversations I'd had with people in the office, whether that's obviously, more formal methods of feedback from candidates, like, Google surveys after the process or whatever that might be for every different company does it differently. But it's like, right, this is exactly how things are now. There was no sugarcoating anything. If something, not that it was really bad before, but just it was really honest. And it's like this word for word, this is what people have said. And I think that honesty piece and that transparency piece is really important, because then that helps you when you're improving these processes and then using that to measure feedback later on. You can be really authentic. And I was upfront and authentic and transparent with candidates in that, this is a bit of a new process. Can you let me know how you find it? Because we're really keen to take this feedback on board. And then hopefully if things need to iterate even further, we can do that. And I think candidates appreciated that honesty, that, it's a new process and to bear with us. But I think they were more inclined to say, or tell me, oh, I've done this within another interview process that I really enjoyed, and it's like, oh, that's really interesting actually, because you don't always hear about that apart from sessions like these where you get to talk to other recruiters about what they're doing. But hearing it from candidates was another method entirely. And then again, like I said, when you do further retrospectives, you can then take your new feedback and kind of compare and contrast, and you've got a tangible journey, so that all this work you're doing, because it's not an overnight thing, it does take a long time. But it's definitely worth it in the end for both the candidate and most importantly, but also us as recruiters.
Yeah, and can I just jump in? I'm mindful that some people, we're talking about collecting feedback from candidates, and I kind of want to enlighten people around a tool that they can use to do that in design thinking, and it's referred to as an empathy map. Essentially, it's a document you can use after interviewing a candidate on their feedback around what their thoughts, feelings, and emotions were in a particular moment in time of the interaction. So when I was at Stacker in particular, we were interviewing a candidate who we really loved, and wanted to offer, but actually we found she might be better for a different role. And the business decided to actually offer her an alternative role to what she'd interviewed for. And unsurprisingly, she declined it. So the TA function wanted to dig a little bit deeper and take some learning from that, from her point of view, but to also guide the business on how to navigate that situation in the future and take some learning. And once we sat with the candidate, we talked through the kind of, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you do and say in these moments? So when we propositioned, this role to you, what were you thinking? Were you feeling anxious? Were you excited? What were the doubts in your mind? What were the things you were really dead cert about? Where were the questions for you? So once we mapped this out in this grid format, we then consolidated it for our business team and took it back and reported kind of the learnings to say, look, if we're ever in this situation again, we're more likely to get a declined offer if we continue to do that repeat behavior. But if we actually tackle these frustrations and these desires from this candidate's point of view, we're more likely to get an offer acceptance rate moving forward. And that actually influenced the way we created our sign-off processes, the way we built our job descriptions, the way that we would then reapprove roles that were going to be offered differently. So it had a really good impact on the business and a good kind of learning experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if people wanted to look that up, did you say it's called an empathy map?
Yep, an empathy map. And it's a really good thing to start with if you're not confident with design thinking agile. It's a really simple tool just to kind of get you started with everything. So try it out on a couple of colleagues or friends in terms of how they experience interactions with you. And it's part of a journey mapping exercise overall. But yeah, great starting point.
Nice. And Ali, did you have an example from earlier that you wanted to share around this piece as well from that design thinking aspect?
Well, I've just talked through the empathy map, but I've got another one, a persona mapping, which for those who don't know, it's a tool that's predominantly used in marketing to create a fictional character that represents your target audience. And it's based on lots of insights and research to create this individual. So there was a time when I was at DELLI and my role was to bring in more direct applications organically into the business. And they were a seed stage, had no TA presence in the market whatsoever. So I sat with DELLI to understand, well, who is your ideal candidate in order to succeed and grow your culture? And their typical or non-typical response was actually, our customers are our candidates. I was like, okay, that's interesting. So decided to partner with the marketing team to understand what research they'd done on their customers and reverse engineer that into a candidate persona map, and then base that on creating a new job advert for the business. And we A/B tested the old advert and the new one, and found the new one generated a 600% increase in applications over a 4-month period. But also I got the best feedback on the back of it from a candidate unsolicited. And to quote, it was I can't stop thinking about DELLI and the values and team that you're building. So to have someone tell you that they can't stop thinking about the proposition that you've built just purely based on an advert really struck a chord with me in terms of speaking to that emotion and getting involved in that candidate space. So yeah, it was a really interesting experiment.
Yeah, amazing. And then Magda, in terms of design thinking and kind of anything you've done at Yelp or previous roles, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, maybe I can share that in general, like if we have a problem, we do experiment. Not necessarily in all the companies I've been working in, because if you are working for a big tech company or consultancy, it's quite not easy to experiment and to be flexible or agile in the process. So definitely smaller companies are easier. And what I think about like experimentation, what I have in mind, there are some examples from my recent years that we had, for example, we have a candidate who was deaf, and so we had a special accommodation for them, and we had interpreter that we found, interpreter who was on the interview with them. So it was, of course, challenging for the coordinators. They put a lot of effort to actually schedule not only interviewer and the candidate, but also interpreter. So we went through all the stages with those candidates, because from the beginning, we inform, if you need any special accommodation, let us know, we will do that. There is no issue for us. So being open-minded to candidates is very important. Some people don't want to. They are shy enough to say, I need special accommodation, because they tend to think that maybe that would imply on the results, which is never the case. So, for example, I had a candidate who didn't tell me, but I could understand that when I had an intro chat with them, had problem with stammering. So instead of saying like next interview will last 45 minutes, which is like a standard, I said to them, we will have 60 minutes for you to articulate to articulate all you want to say, to ask questions. So I think you have to be very empathic for people, and also very careful about the special conditions for candidates and this flexibility, because not everyone wants it. And yeah, but definitely, like splitting interviews, it's also important. It's possible if somebody is in Australia and we have interviewers in United States. It's not common to have 5 rounds of interviews, like as a panel interview here in one go, because we don't want them to do it in the middle of the night. So we will split that. So definitely accommodation it's important, but we also have to be careful not to discourage people that they have special conditions or so.
Yeah. And just to go on the point you mentioned about it's harder to make some of these experiments in the environments, but all I'd ask is that you be super curious about your candidates and empathize them, even on a local, more one-to-one level, and you'll start to make marginal changes over time, and that will still have a big impact on the experience you deliver.
Yeah, there's a lot around, I think empathy has been kind of at the heart of our discussion, really, when it comes to candidate experience, which I think it leads us nicely on to, the topic of like the end process. So there's unfortunate times, of course, when, we as recruiters, there's rejections. And in the current market, there's a lot of people out of work. There's a lot of people who, rejections are bad at the worst of times, but they can mean even more now. People are having, many rejections, not hearing back. And part of our role as TA professionals is to make this rejection process as empathetic and smooth as possible for candidates. And almost to your point earlier, Josh, like these candidates may be the right candidate in a little time, and it's about ending the process in a really, fair way and giving the candidates what they deserve. So maybe we can chat a little bit around, how you've handled rejecting candidates, and any, tips or anything that's worked for you folks in the process as well. Josh, I'll maybe hand over to you first on this one.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I absolutely agree that I think, when we do reject a candidate, I think the biggest piece of advice, and again, it sounds simple, but just be human about it. I think there are some processes I've seen out there in the past where I've been fortunate not to be behind them, but where you'll go through a several stage interview process and you'll still have that no reply at business.com, sorry, we've gone with somebody else, and it feels really inhuman. And I think, if you put yourself in the candidate's shoes, what would it be like for you to receive that? So with all my candidates, it's about having a really, again, that just really honest conversation, saying like, look, this hasn't worked out at this time. This is why, what are your thoughts on that? And also still encouraging that feedback loop. So, even though saying that, oh yeah, I want to get feedback on a process from a candidate who's been unsuccessful, where they might be really biased and say it was a horrible process because they didn't get the job, but that might not be the case. And I've had really honest feedback from candidates before where it's like, yeah, that's a shame, but this is the feedback I'd give on the process. And that feedback is just as important as those candidates that are successful, because again, it's that whole continuous iteration piece. So I think, yeah, like, try and reduce the automation as much as possible, especially when a candidate is interviewed with you and taking that time. Because again, especially in the tech world, it's a very small world. And I think the idea that of job hopping isn't really a thing anymore. People tend to move around like every 18 months to 2 years, and they will ultimately come back to you as a candidate, I'm sure, as long as they've had a good experience. So having that feedback and being able to kind of, have that empathy with the candidate and talk to them, if they are a past candidate, what's changed, what might be different this time. And there's been success stories where it's been wrong time for a candidate, but they've come back and we've ended up hiring them in the future. So it's really important.
And Ali, how about you from a rejection process perspective?
Yeah, so I have lots to say on the rejection process, but I personally think it stems from the business firstly doesn't know what it's trying to achieve in the rejection process. It has a goal to attract all this lovely talent and dress at the shop window and bring them into the shop store and talk to them, and then the candidate goes to buy something from you and you're not interested in taking their money, but you don't tell them why and you don't give them a reason. And what you've done is you've created this lovely experience from the front end point of view, pulled them in, and you've got that natural foot traffic. Why would you not then nurture that talent to your benefit? What are you trying to achieve by getting them in the door? So kind of to Josh's point, it's well, if they're not right for right here, right now, they might be in the future, or they might be an ambassador in some way, shape, or form, or they might be a business connection. So figure out what your goal is with your rejected candidates firstly, but also talk to them to understand what they need from that process. Do they want coaching and advice on how to go to their next interviews? Do they want more detailed feedback? Do they just want, I don't know, just a simple acknowledgement, say you're not successful, but I'm okay without the feedback? But find out from your candidates what they need from you in that moment and provide that morally and empathetically to them. And it sounds quite laborious process, but it's worthwhile, because nobody in industry is doing rejections right, and it's a huge competitive advantage if you get it right.
Yeah, and I think to that point, like, we talk about employee advocacy, and I think that extends beyond recruitment necessarily, but also offboarding, about getting that feedback and gathering why that potential employee is moving on. And you might find some really interesting insights within that helps you then steer that conversation with future talent around their potential journey within your business and what that's going to look like. Because again, with the idea of job hopping isn't really a thing, the candidates probably do have in mind, how long they might want to stay there for, in an ideal world. So being able to talk to them holistically about the entire employee life cycle, I think is valuable as well. And, to your point, Ali, before around that design thinking piece, you can do persona reviews and empathy maps with literally, not just candidates, but also people who are leaving the business, and identifying what the pain points there are, and then work that into maybe an attraction piece about telling your story and being authentic with potential talent as well.
And Magda, how about you?
So just to summarize, maybe, because a lot of good things were said already, so it's hard to add something. First, try to email everyone who applied. I know sometimes it's not possible, but ATSs are good in giving like templates, and it's quite quickly and easily to send everyone the email. Second, try not to use do not reply email, but personal email from the recruiter. Third thing, we don't use calls anymore, we use emails. It's quite interesting how the market changed, because when I started in recruitment 8 years ago, I was calling people with the feedback, and people were not prepared to get this kind of calls, you know. And it's very interesting how the job market has been changed. So we email, so they can take this information and think about how to respond to us. Last but not least, we can offer like the personalized rejection feedback after the panel stage. Because why after the panel? Because then we have enough information to share. But it's not obligatory again. If somebody wants, they just ask for it. Yeah, and then we have a Google Meet chat with them very quickly. But yeah, that's and be empathic at the moment, because there is a lot of people who are really like, I don't want to say frustrated, but definitely discouraged because of the number of rejections they get.
Just to build on that, the frustration, think of it from a broad market. Candidates now are in making tens to hundreds of applications. And if you're going to get the same email rejection template, I call it the wallpapering effect. There's nothing exciting about it or memorable or joyful. So what can you do differently in your rejection emails that make someone hopeful and excited to continue their job hunting journey? So I kind of bid that to you to kind of go discover that, go find that out, and then make that change in your emails.
I can add something, because that reminded me about a few examples. Like a few candidates actually responded to me that it was very nice. It was one of the nicest rejection email I got, and we started to think, okay, what is it special about this email? And again, it's the same what we have in the job advert: simple English, like short, inclusive. Again, we also put the same principles in rejection emails.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier around, calls versus emails, it's so important to realize that everyone's an individual in terms of their preferences. And like you said, years ago, it was always a phone call rejection. And actually, that doesn't work for everyone. And it's figuring out like what that candidate wants, especially when they start to get to the later stage in the process. And I'll always think back to, personally, when I was job hunting a few years ago, I had a call put in my diary, and it was a video call. And this was after final interviews, presentations. I was like, oh gosh, surely it's an offer if it's a video call. And I was rejected over a video call, and it was one of the worst experiences as a candidate. And I understand probably from the recruiter's perspective, it was trying to give the best process, because it was like, hey, this is FaceTime. But actually, it was very hard to digest bad news on a video call and kind of smile and say, oh yeah, that's fine. Whereas actually, if you again, on personal preference, if you get that information over an email and then you have a follow-up video call, that's brilliant, because then you kind of had that time to digest it if you're that sort of person. So I do think looking at people from that individual lens, especially when you get to that later stage in the process where you really want to nurture this future talent as well. Well, we have time for some questions, so from Q&A. So if anyone wants to pop us a little comment in the chat, if you've got any thoughts, questions, observations, please let us know. We've got a few comments that have come through. So we have Mark saying, love that, Ali. Chelsea, that's incredible. That's amazing, Magda, from Magdalena. And then a comment: for candidates who went through all stages, I would always make time to share the feedback via a phone call or VC. Yeah, really good point. I think it's really kind of nurturing that talent as well. And I guess from our side, this has been such an interesting conversation. It's one of those conversations that we could probably have another hour on a webinar on this topic. And there's so many learnings that we can take from different organizations. But as we kind of, I guess, end here, maybe it would be good to kind of go around and maybe just summarize, what you'd like people to take away from this, or any lasting thoughts that you'd like to share around this webinar on candidate experience. Ali, I'll go with you first.
So I think today is just about being curious and tapping into your empathy skills and treating candidates how they want to be treated, in summary.
Yeah. Magda, how about you?
Just wanted to say the statement I just started with. So treat people like you want to be treated. But this is a universal statement that you can put definitely in recruitment. And be empathetic. It's important, and be curious. I think curiosity is very important for our roles.
And Josh, how about you?
So I think I can't say more than what's already been said. Absolutely, have that empathy, be curious, and from a design thinking perspective, I think my recommendation is definitely take the time to learn about that if you can. Like, if you're fortunate enough to be in a tech business and you have UX designers and product designers, lean on them. They love helping out and talking about this stuff because it shows you have an interest in the world. But also, there's loads of like books and things that really simple introduction to just user experience, and a lot of that is how you can then just think of replace the word user with candidate, and you can apply the exact same effects. So if anyone wants any book recommendations, just connect with me and I'll share mine. But yeah, that's probably my advice.
Amazing. And we've just got a few questions from some audience. So Madalena has asked, what has been the biggest challenge in selling the process change to the business?
I can probably give an indication. I think firstly, it's a mindset change rather than a process change. And really, it's about, I think, you taking ownership of what you can do in your role and realm first, and being empathetic and curious. And because you're being data-driven, you're collecting facts and insights, you can then take that to the business, and you're essentially reframing the query around candidates are customers. So it's in your best interest for us to get this right. I find that conversation tends to work really well in the business. I don't know, Josh, if you've had a different experience.
No, I think that's very similar. I think when you're talking about selling it into the business, a lot of the time it's, just keep it high level, but being able to bring that data to that discussion is really, really important, because then it backs up the work that you're doing. Yes, initially you might have to do some of this, creating feedback and workshops and all this kind of stuff kind of initially before you have that conversation necessarily, because you have to gather that feedback and say, right, okay, this is what's working, but also this is what isn't, and this is why. And if we change A, B, and C, we're hopefully going to have an improvement on candidate experience, hiring manager experience, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think, just have those human conversations with that data to kind of back it up, and that context and why you're actually putting all this work in. And then I think a lot of businesses will all of a sudden, that switch will flip and say, yeah, that sounds like a great initiative. Because I think when you talk about empathy and that, giving that human light on candidates, I think that's when even senior leaders are like, yeah, it's a real feel good like initiative. Let's do that. As cheesy as it might sound, but it works.
Yeah, but I could also give you a case study. Look at Virgin Media's research on bad experience in their business, and it was costing them 5.5 million annually. So if you're not sure how to convince the business around empathy and emotions, that business case might do it for you.
Yeah, second it starts costing money, oh no, red warning lights are on.
Talk the language.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you all so much for your time today. This has been such an amazing conversation to be a part of. We'll obviously have this available as a replay as well. So for anyone watching, you can go back, take any notes if you'd like, and share it to any folks that you think might benefit from it as well. Like I said, in terms of if you're new here to Hire, we are a global community for TA and HR folk if you work internally. So you can head on over to our lovely link below to join us. We tend to carry on these webinar conversations with inside the community. We've got a number of like specialist channels to discuss specific topics like DEIB, sourcing. So you will find hopefully some like-minded people who'll be able to chat to, answer any questions you might have as well. So you can head on over if you'd like to join. The other thing that I wanted to to say is our webinar next week. So we will be back same time, same place. And next week we've got the lovely Liz Johnson joining us, and we're talking all things stakeholder management. So really how you can, as a TA leader or a TA manager, start to really shift from being transactional and to be looked at as a real business partner as well. So hopefully we will see you then for that one. But finally, just a huge thank you again to all of our fabulous panelists today. We really appreciate all the time that you spend talking with us, and hopefully we will chat again soon. I'm sure certainly offline. I feel like this conversation could continue for many an hour. Thank you all so much. See you later, everyone. Bye.